All right, welcome back. So in this next example, I would like to go ahead and try something a little bit more complicated, but hopefully not too complex. And that is, let's work on one of these monsters and mysteries shots, adding in this gorilla rebob thing into a moving shot. So this is the one we're going to be focusing on right here, and let's go ahead and get to it. So first thing I got to do, whoa, what's all that stuff? Go save as. And I've already got my folder structure set up and everything, but if I didn't, that would be the place to do that. So let's just go in here to our folder structure, After Effects projects, and actually I already have one because I did it once already. So let's just go ahead and call this, well, actually, I'm not going to call it version 2. That's what I was tempted to call it, but usually the way versions are handled is that the version is an improvement on the one that came before it. So in that case, I'm actually going to call this B because this is an alternate version, not a continuation of the first version of this file. All right, makes sense? So just like before, I'm going to go ahead and set up a folder structure to get started here. I got source, and I know that in this case, I'm going to have 3D stuff, and I'm also going to have a video layer, but that's it. So I actually don't need anything else, but I will go ahead and set up a pre-comp folder as well. Always handy to have. And remember, this structure can change depending on the project, but just, make sure it makes sense to someone who is opening it 6 months down the road. That someone may be you and maybe somebody else. If you hand this project off, you get the idea. All right, so let's go ahead and import. Well, first let me just hop over into Cinema. So I'm going to be adding in, here's my little gorilla guy, and there's the shot. Actually, I think this is a different shot because he doesn't jump in the shot that we're on, but same character. And the idea is the same as if this was a person shot on a green screen template, except there's going to be one exception a little bit later down in the process, and I will let you know what that is when we get there. But let's go ahead and import that guy. So we'll pull up our personal source here, and actually this is in 3D because it's my 3D render, and we're working on shot 4 glaring. In this case, this is already on alpha, so I actually only need one file, which is brilliant. Next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and bring in my video layer. So that's going to be under source video, and that's how it should be normally. And we got shot. Whoa, I brought in the wrong shot. We're actually going to do shot 1, not shot 4. So let me delete that. Get the right file. Sheesh. Come on, Devin. Rebob. Oh, that's right. I didn't even label it properly. Let's actually go ahead and just label this properly so that I stay consistent, really. Okay. So now I've imported that. And just as usual, I'm going to go ahead and check the frame rate, which is at 30 frames per second. And if we look at the video's at 2997 frames per second. That's pretty darn close for like a 2-second long shot, but it does actually make a difference if your video footage is off, even by that 0.5% of a frame, because once it goes down a few more seconds, then you'll start to get differences in the timing. Keyframes will end up in weird places. Weird things will happen to your audio. It's no fun for anybody. So 29.97 and 29.97. And again, all that's doing is changing the rate at which it's playing these frames back. It's an image sequence. It worked the same way for a video, but it's just making sure that this is playing at the same rate as my video file. So I'll do that handy dandy little trick. Oh, and by the way, actually, I should mention this now. If you, like, I often work in 24p, which is 23.976. In fact, most everything I do is at that 24p. After Effects, by default, brings in your image sequences at 30 frames per second. And if you don't want to have to change that every single time, you go down to Preferences and you bring up, what is it? One of these guys. Import. Here we go. Import, and you'll see that the sequence footage is brought in 30 frames per second. So I'm actually going to change that to 23.976 because that's what I like to use most often. Now in this particular case, since this was for broadcast, it's 29.97, so it won't help us for this particular project, but just know that you can change that by default. All right, so let's do that handy dandy little trick where you take your video footage, drop it into this little composition window right here, and now we have our plate. And you can see this is, you know, not the best footage in the world. It's kind of grainy and a little bit blurry, and we got to put our character right here. So let's just throw them on there real quick to see how that's going to look. Okay, so right there you can see that there's definitely a major difference in the colors. Part of that is because the camera doesn't produce pure black, whereas my computer render actually does produce pure black. And the same way with white, the video is not gonna be completely bright, but this thing can actually get 100% bright. Now this is a pretty dark render, but basically what we're gonna wanna do before we do anything else, I mean, you can do this whenever you want, but let's go ahead and just get this color looking a little bit closer. So we're gonna go to Effect, then Color Correction, and Levels. And you know, Levels is down and dirty. Curves takes levels to the next level. But we're gonna use Levels because that'll get us pretty close. Now the first thing I'm gonna do is actually just bring this black up so that the black level matches or is close to the black level that we're using in the video. If we zoom in right here, you can kind of see that what we're doing is limiting how black we're allowing this image to get. So we're bringing the darkest value in it to a lighter color. And that will help us get a little bit closer to what this original footage was doing. Now we could do the same thing if you had some bright spots. You could do the same thing with the white. See, that's basically taking the brightest areas and making them get darker. Anything that was pure white will now be this tone of gray right here. All right, now that we've done that, we can kind of start fudging these things around a little bit. Now, you know, this is a very dark shot, so we're probably gonna have this thing be pretty much black, with just a couple of little highlights on it there. But I can also say, you know, I feel like there's a little bit too much red in here, and this shot has more green in it. So you can actually change the channel right here, and we'll bring up our green. And if I pull this, that's gonna bring more green into the shot, which I kind of want to do, but you can do the other way around. Take your red, pull this, and that will pull the red out of the video a little bit. So I don't feel like there should be as much red highlight. Now there's not a lot. I also feel like there's just generally too much saturation on this thing. We're trying to get this thing to be really pretty subtle. So I'm also going to pull up Color Correction, Hue, and Saturation, and I'm just going to turn the saturation down a little bit. That's just going to bring them closer to black and white. You know, in the nighttime, your eyes don't see color. What does that matter? It's a video camera. You can see a little bit of green right there, but I think that looks better. But you'll notice that this definitely does, and I'm on quarter quality, so I don't know if you can see. It still looks pretty 3D, you know. So this is something that you won't have to worry about if you're bringing in green screen footage. But in this case, since I have a 3D render, I'm actually going to add some noise to it to bring that grain. I don't know if you can see this on the monitor here, but there's all kinds of grain, and it's not just a pure black color. Whereas the 3D render, that's pretty much, like, there's a little bit of detail right here, but that's pretty much a pure solid color right there, and that makes it look fake. So we're going to go up to our effect, go down to noise and grain, and I'm going to add grain. And if you're on a slower computer or a laptop or something, this grain is actually kind of a heavy effect to process sometimes. So that's why by default it's in preview. I'm going to change it to final output. And oh my goodness, that is way too much grain for me. So first thing I'm going to do is turn down the intensity, and actually I take that back. So the first thing I'm going to do is try to match the grain size, because you can see that this stuff is much smaller amounts of grain. Granted, there's a whole lot more visible over here, but the size is not even right. So if we change that to like 0.5, I feel like that's getting closer. I might even soften it up just a teeny bit, and then we'll pull it down to like 0.2. So let me just click that on and off, and you see it's just, and actually let's bring this down to 0.1. Don't need a whole lot. 0.15, how about? Split the difference. No, not 1.5, 0.15. There we go, there we go. So you can see what that's doing there, just adding a little bit of grain to kind of match him in that shot. So we got our grain here, and the last thing I'm gonna do, you know, his edges, even though we got the grain on there, the edges on this guy are still pretty sharp. They're a little too sharp to blend with the, especially since the footage itself is kind of blurry. So I'm going to add some blur. So I know Photoshop has Gaussian blur, which I like to pronounce Gaussian blur, like it's French. Fast blur does pretty much the same thing, but it does it faster. And if your object is going off the edge, turn on this, otherwise you'll get kind of a weird little halo edge thing. And I'm just going to do 2 on this. Just a little bit of blur, just to blur up the whole thing. Now you'll notice that's blurring the noise as well, and I don't want that, so I'm actually going to change this. These things are calculated from the top down, if you didn't already know that. So, you know, we're doing our levels, then we're making it less saturated, then we're blurring it a little bit, and then we're adding a little bit of grain as the final step. And if I just click this off, so that's what we started with, and that's where we're at now. You know, it's not perfect, but it definitely looks a little bit more like it's in that shot. Okay, so next thing we're going to do is kind of go and place him on the branch, make him look like he's sitting where he needs to be. That doesn't look bad right there. All right, pretty fancy. And now we got to get him to move with the shot, because this is a moving shot. Let me just turn him off right here and remind you of the fact that we've got this moving shot. So how do we get this guy in here? Well, we're gonna have to track something, and the best thing to do is to try to look at the footage and find a point of high contrast that stays in the shot for the entire duration of the shot. That's not always possible, and sometimes you'll have to combine more than one track together in order to get the final result. But in this case, I'm noticing there's actually this little, not sure if that's a shadow or a piece of bark on there or what it is, but that little object is in the shot the entire time, which is perfect. So let's track this thing. So you click on your footage here, and pull up your tracker, and we're going to go to track motion, and we just need a simple 1-point track. You can actually track rotation and scale, which will add a whole separate thing, but in this case this shot stays fairly, I mean, it wobbles a little bit as far as rotation goes, but fairly consistent, so I'm not going to worry about having those 2 tracking points in there. I'm just going to worry about the 1. Okay, and the way that this tracker works is, you know, it's tracking the pixels that are inside of this box, and it's looking for that same pattern across multiple frames. So the more precise that you make this around the thing that you're trying to track, like let's do it like this, the better it's going to be. You don't want to make it too small because you want to give it enough information, but if this box is huge and there's a whole lot of stuff changing inside of it, it's going to have a hard time figuring out what it is that you want it to track. Also, so that's what your, I guess the term for this is your point of interest, and then over here is your search area. So this box is where it's going to be looking for that pattern. So if your box is too small, then it's not going to be able to track, because your pattern's going to move outside of that box if you have a fast moving video. If you make it too large, it's just going to take a really long time to search, and it might actually make mistakes, because this thing can get confused pretty easily. So, you know, make it as big as it needs to be, but not too big. And let's just hit play here and analyze backwards and just see what kind of results we can get out of the box. Oh, almost. So, you know, not Andrew Kramer good, but we got some pretty good results down here while this thing was moving slowly. And then once it started to get up here, let's see if it went outside the box. It didn't, it just got confused. And sometimes I find, here's a little trick for you. If you don't just hit the play button, if you go 1 frame at a time, and it doesn't want to do it. Why not? What's going on? That's very strange. Okay, let's put it right back on this thing up here. There we go. Why is it not letting me go 1 frame at a time? Oh, there it goes. That was strange. Yeah, if you go 1 frame at a time, it tends to get better results. Don't ask me why. It should be doing the same calculation either way. And also, don't be afraid to get in there and just use your own brain to figure out where this thing should be. If it's a super blurry shot, like I know it's going to be right in there somewhere. It's about right there, maybe. You know, you can hand animate this stuff in order to get stuff that's difficult to track to work for you. If you can track part of the shot, you can sometimes fake the rest of the shot, and you're good to go. There we go. Okay, and that's actually a little off, I think, now that I can see the... If you look at the animation curve, especially on a shot like this that's pretty continuous, you know, if your curve doesn't look right, if you've got one point that's like jaggy all off to the side, then you can be pretty sure that that's not correct. But let's just go back. And by the way, I'm using Control left and right to move one frame at a time. If you didn't know that you could do that, it's super useful. And of course, you can also use your arrow keys without Control just to nudge this thing around. And then people really, like, who are listening to you and not looking at your screen think you're doing a whole lot of work when you're like, there. Beautiful. All right, so now we have this little tracker guy. Fantastic. And how do we get this information onto our object? Well, you would be tempted to just go edit target, put it on my rebob, and hit apply. And that'll sort of work. Oh, where's our rebob now? So let's, oh, I turned him off. He's down here. So what that did is it took the center point and it just animated the position of my rebob all the way. And that's, you know, not really that useful because I don't want him down there. I want him over here. If I move it, you know, the position keyframes on this object are locked and they're all animated. And I find that to be very inconvenient. If I'm trying to make changes to this thing or I need to add something or tweak anything about this, if I need to scale this object down, that's gonna affect, well, scale may not affect, but it may affect where this object is. So let's actually delete those keyframes, and instead what we're going to do is create a null object. And this just helps organize your project a little bit more, make it obvious what you're doing. Tracker, if you had more than one piece of the tracker, you might call it something else, tracker one, whatever it is that you're tracking. And we're going to take that same thing, we're going to go back into our video footage. If you double click it, it'll bring back up your tracker here. Go to edit target, and let's set that to the tracker. I'm actually going to call this tracker null because I'm anal and I want to know the difference between tracker and tracker null. The tracker's on the whatever, you get the idea. So edit target, it's on tracker null, and I am going to hit apply X and Y. And now you'll see that I have a tracker that is moving where I need it to be. There's no keyframes on my rebob at all. So I can put him right here on the branch, and then I can connect him up to this null object. And now, almost the same as before, except I have a little bit of a buffer because this object is not connected to the track, so I can move it anywhere that I want to. So we've got our rebob in here. He's moving with the scene, and his color is pretty good, but he still doesn't look like he belongs because that branch is supposed to be on top of him. So here's an issue. Okay, so before what we did is we just duplicated the plate, brought it on top, and this is real hard to see. So I'm actually gonna, just while I work on this thing, I'm gonna put some color correction on it in order to bring up a little bit of contrast. It still doesn't even help. I'm just gonna have to eyeball where I think this branch is. Let's go ahead and just draw out a branch, and we can always tweak this a little bit later on. Let's see, I think it goes right there like that. Pretty much like that. There we go. And I'm gonna go ahead and feather this by like 5. Oh man, we got some issues. It looks so light. Oh, that's because I put the levels on it. All right, there we go. So, you know, sort of. sort of covers him up a little bit. It's not great. It kind of looks manky, but we're gonna have a major issue. So we're on frame 63. That's important. You'll notice. Okay, so I masked that shot on frame 63, but it's a moving shot. So this mask is going to have to move with the footage. Well, I already tracked this thing, and I don't feel like I want to go in and hand animate this mask. So how do I actually use both of these pieces of information to make my life easier? So first thing I'm going to do is go back to frame 63, because that's where I made the mask. And in this case, instead of putting the mask on the footage itself, I'm actually going to go and create a solid layer, and I'm going to call this branch matte. It doesn't matter what color it is, because we're actually only going to be using the alpha information. But since this is the same size as the layer that I have the mask on, I'm going to copy it and paste it onto this layer. That only worked because these were the same size. All right, and I'm also going to take that mask off of this layer below. So just like we did before, we're going to take this track matte and set it, instead of Luma, because Luma is black and white, we're going to use an alpha matte, and that's going to take the area that was opaque, which was inside of this mask, and make that part of the footage show up. If you invert this, alpha inverted, then now it's going to actually cover up everything except what's inside of that branch. So we want to go alpha. So it's taking this alpha information and applying it to this layer. And if we solo that, you can see we've got the same thing as if we had the mask on here, but the difference is this can move because it's not part of the footage. So I'm actually going to take this branch matte and I'm going to link it up to that tracker null. And now, with a little bit of luck, you can see that that mask is moving with it. And that's because the entire layer is now moving with the shot. So we have a static shot that's not going anywhere and a moving track matte on top of it that is linked up to this moving tracker null. You with me so far? Okay, so that's looking all right. And actually, I was thinking I was going to have to animate this mask a little bit because there would be perspective changes or something, but it's actually not that bad. I think I'm also going to tweak this just a little bit more. I was thinking the levels look pretty good, except now that he's got that branch over top of him, it seems like he actually does need to come up even more. Yeah, there we go. That's looking even better. And maybe make him a little bit lighter. I don't care. Well, that's too much. Okay, that's definitely better than what I just... So that's where we were. That's where we are now. I think that looks better. And just like we did before, we can also create an adjustment layer here and kind of bring those levels back down. So the overall shot, you can actually see there's a spike. So pretty much all of the color in the entire scene, or all the luminance values, are all down here. So there's not much contrast in this shot at all. But there we go. If we make that a little bit darker, I think that makes it scarier, helps out a little bit. But again, the idea is to match the thing you're compositing to the background plate and then worry about your color correction after that. It's going to look way better than if you try to color correct those individually and then put them together. All right, and so we'll just leave that on. So next thing I want to do, so it's looking all right, but this hand needs to be over top of this branch, I think. So if I had prepared better, I might have actually rendered out the hand separated out by itself in my 3D program, but I'm just going to go ahead and draw a mask around it because this guy doesn't move a whole lot, or at least his hand doesn't. So that should be pretty good right there. And let's feather that by like 3 or something. And I put that on, the reason it looks so weird is I actually accidentally put that on top of my adjustment layer. So let's drag that around there. And it's subtle, it's very subtle, but you can see that now his arm comes around the front of that tree, which is a little bit better, getting closer every day. So now he sort of looks like he's there. But a couple other things. One thing that I noticed is, he's got He's got to have some shadows under his feet. He doesn't look like he's actually on the branch. So that's the next thing we'll do. Now, you might be tempted to create like a black solid and go and like, you know, oh, I did not create that the right size. Make comp size, make my black solid. And you might be tempted to just draw yourself out a little shadow here and stick it under his feet and go to multiply, feather this thing a little bit. But the problem with doing that is that we don't actually have full black in this thing. So it's going to always stand out. It's going to look way too dark because there's nothing else that dark in the shot. So a better thing to do, and it's going to be difficult on other shots, but on this one it's going to work perfectly well, is I'm going to grab the black area over here, which is not true black. It's got all kinds of noise and stuff in it, and I'm going to use that. So that's my original plate shot here. I'm going to duplicate it, and actually, since the shot changes over time, I don't want to worry about, you know, what might happen if the branch comes into the view or something like that. So I'm actually going to go to time, freeze frame, and now I just have a single frame of this, and I'm going to drag the whole entire frame over and steal some of that black in order to use as shadows. And I'm also going to turn off my track null because I don't need that in my face while I'm working. And let's just kind of go in here and create some fake shadows underneath this guy's legs. And another one here. I'm going to bring up the feather with F for both of those. And let's put it at like 8 or something like that. And again, you know, it's a subtle effect. And I'm sorry I keep zooming all over the place. All right, here we go. Subtle. It's a subtle effect, but you can see that that definitely helps ground him a little bit now into the shot. And since this is a static shot, it's now a still frame, and since I need it to move with my rebob, I'm going to go ahead and connect this up to the tracker null as well, and now it's going to move with it. See that? Otherwise it would just kind of sit there. So even though he's sliding a little bit on the branch, I don't have time to fix that right now because we need to get through this thing, so I would definitely go and make him stick a little bit better. But hopefully you'll get the idea that this is a bit more believable now because we've got the branch in front of him, his arm in front of that, and the very last thing to do is actually going to be to add a little bit of blur when he comes down, because the footage itself is blurry as this thing is moving down, and he's actually pretty sharp. So you can see there's all kinds of motion blur on that. There's nothing on him. There's a really great plugin, if you can afford it, called Real Smart Motion Blur that will actually analyze the movement inside of the footage and make these blurs for you automatically. But in this case, since he's actually moving fairly in a straight direction, you know, there's nothing coming at you, and there's nothing moving in two different directions on the same frame, we can actually get away with just using the built-in directional blur. So we're going to bring up directional blur. And this actually, again, is going to go underneath that grain, because even though we want motion blur on the footage, we don't actually want to blur the noise, because the noise is a product of the camera sensor and it doesn't experience motion blur. Right? Okay, so at this part in the shot right here, let's just kind of turn this thing up until we start to see... Oh, wait, I'm changing the direction. And just turn this up here until we start to see about the same amount of blur as we have on our footage layer here. Let's try a lot. Let's try like 15. That looks pretty good to me. Right, like that. So I'm gonna put a keyframe on my blur length and kind of step through this footage. Control left and right will step you 1 frame at a time. Control shift left and right will step you 10 frames at a time, which is very handy if you don't want to have to wait for every single frame to load as you're going through this thing. And so now down at this point, we're already at less motion blur, but it's not completely gone. So we'll take this thing down to like 5. And once it gets down here, there we go, about right here, I will go ahead and drop that to 0. Actually, it looks good. So let's just leave it on 1. I think it helps to have just a little bit of something. And the frame kind of actually does go to the left right there, but I don't think it's enough to blur, to justify a motion blur. Now you can see the footage itself actually is blurring a little bit more right there. So let's actually emulate that as well. So we'll bring our fast blur back up, put a keyframe on the blurriness, and let's just turn that back up like a little bit, maybe 5. There we go. Does it go back into focus? It does. So bring that back down to 2. Was that what it was? What was that? If you want to see the keyframes that you have created, hit U. That'll bring up every property that has a keyframe on it. If you hit U twice very fast, that'll actually show you everything that you've changed on the layer. So U is just a quick way to see where your keyframes are. And F9 will make those easy ease, but I will go here to easy ease since I can't hit F9 right now. I might do the same thing with blur length. I don't think it's really necessary. Although be careful, because I want this to, if we pull up the curve for this, which there isn't a curve, it's stair-steppy, it's moving at a consistent rate. But if we look at the value, you can see that it's smoothly going down to this amount of blur, and then it's going to this amount of blur. Smoothly was the wrong word. I meant consistently. The envelope is the same throughout. If I actually did go through and make these guys easy ease, it's actually not going to do what I want it to do, because it's going to go down to this amount of blur, then it's going to stop blurring, or stop continuing to get more blurry, if that makes sense, unless I change this handle in the middle like that. You can see now that curve follows through nice and smoothly. It's probably not even necessary, because blur is one of those things that you're not going to feel the easing on as much, so long as it feels right in the shot. All right, and let's preview our final shot. Let's actually do it full screen so you can see. I don't know if we can do full res quickly enough. The magic of editing. No, screw that. We're going to do... There we go. Oh, it's so blurry and wonderful. But I believe he's in that shot. And the last thing that I did in the original shot was I gave this guy optical flare eyes. If you don't have optical flares, you should get it, because it's awesome. Very, very cool plugin. I think it's like $200 or something. There are many, many, many uses for that. If you don't know what optical flares is, it's a plugin by Andrew Kramer from Video Copilot, and it helps you create realistic looking flares. That's all it does, but it does a really good job at it. So let me just show you that real quick. So we got optical flares, makes a flare by default. You can go in here and you can change all kinds of different settings. I actually have some presets that I like to start with. That way I can get some very different looks without having to tweak a whole bunch of settings, And in this case, I really just want that eyeball. I don't care about all this other stuff. So I'm going to turn off everything, including that little spike ball, and just leave with the ball here. And I'm going to make this guy red. There we go. So, I mean, really, I could have done that any number of ways, but I like optical flares because something about it just feels nice. And I'm actually going to change the blending mode to add. And that's a little bit too big right there. We'll turn our brightness down. We'll turn our scale down. Just a little bit of a subtle effect right there. Boom. There you go. And in this case, I actually have to do a little bit of additional tracking to get this thing in there. I mean, if I can throw it onto that tracker null, and that'll probably get me pretty darn close. But his head is actually moving, so that's not gonna cut it in this case. There's a couple of different ways to do this. One of the ways is to actually bring the position information of where his eyeball is from Cinema. But let's say this was not 3D. Let's say this was a green screen character and you still want to add his eyes and make them red. Well, what you're going to have to do is actually pre-compose this rebob. And I'll call this pre-comp. Now I'm going to go in here. I'm going to take this guy. Okay, so the reason that I'm pre-composing this is there is movement on the character, and then there's also movement on the main frame. So we're gonna track this character's movement, and then we're gonna add that to the movement of the main frame. The easiest way to do that is to have it inside a pre-comp, and we're gonna make another pre-comp for the eyeballs that will match exactly where this guy's eyeballs are, and then we can just link it up in the main comp. I don't know if you followed all that, but I'll show you. So we've got our layer, and just like we did with the tracking of the tree, we're gonna go track motion, and I'm just gonna do one eye at a time. So I'll just grab a point. You could probably track right in the center. I like to do the corner of the eye. I don't know that it really makes that much of a difference. Let's try to actually do the center this time. And I should be able to just hit play. He doesn't move his head a whole lot. There we go. Boom, fantastic. There we go. And I'm gonna create myself a null. Now I will call this right eye track. Okay, and I'm gonna edit my target, right eye track, hit apply. There we go. Now I've got that information in keyframe form. Another little trick that I can do, since I want this information as is, ready to go, I'm actually gonna take this rebob pre-comp, I'm gonna duplicate it with Control D, and now I'm gonna call this rebob eyes. Okay, and now I have a copy of that same thing, and I don't even need this rebob anymore because I copied the position information over. I have that. Now I would do, obviously I would do the left eye as well. Heck, let's just go ahead and do that. It won't take too long. So we're gonna do a second motion track here. Put that on this right here, hit play. Oh my gosh, it's perfect. We'll create another null object, and I can just actually duplicate this null object right here, call it left eye track. And even though it already has position information on it, that'll get overwritten when you apply it, so you don't need to worry about deleting it unless it makes you feel better. So we'll go edit target, right eye track. We're gonna hit apply, X and Y, and now we have two null objects that are following this guy's eyeballs. We don't need the rebob anymore. You can either delete it or just get rid of, or just turn it off. I'm gonna delete it just so it's not cluttering up my project. Okay, so now I'm actually gonna go back in here, and I'm gonna take this flare that I created in the main comp, I'm gonna cut it, and I'm going to paste it into this layer. And another little trick, if you Control Alt F, that is gonna put that layer scaled perfectly with the composition, which is awesome. So since this flare is really, really tiny and it's not going, you know, there's nothing going up to the edges, I could just actually grab this and link it up to that right eye track. That's probably what, you know, that's probably what I do. But just to show you another option, if this was a more complicated flare, or for example, if this flare was larger and went off the edge, if you try to do that, well, you can see the problem. It's going to have a big hard line right there. So instead, what we're going to do is actually use the optical flare and link that up to the position of this right eye right here. So I have my position keyframes exposed. I'm going to take the center or the position XY of this thing and alt click, and that's going to bring up right here, and I'm going to do that whole little value plus thing, and the reason I use value plus is it just gives me some flexibility in case something doesn't work the way that I want it to work. Like I was talking about how I don't always track the exact point where I'm going to be putting the thing, so if you do value plus, then it'll just allow you to move that over just a little bit. The only problem is when you do value plus, also, I didn't link this up to the right thing. So value plus, and I tried to do it right on the composition layer, like that. That doesn't work because you actually need the position information, not just what layer it is. Okay, so that'll work. But now you'll see that my flare is like way over here, and that's because when you're value plus, it's adding the position that's already there. So you got to zero that out. But like I said, the nice thing is that you can move that stuff after the fact. So did I do my right eye and my left eye? I actually have these terms backwards. This is the left, my left. This is his right eye. I'm gonna be anal and just relabel these so they're correct. because otherwise it's confusing. This would be his left eye, his right eye, and heck, I'm even going to change this to green, just so I can see that those are different. Change this one to blue. There we go. And go back into our flare, which is gigantic, and take that back down. What was it, like 80? There we go. Let's actually make it 100 since we scaled it. There we go. And I'm going to create a flare for a second time. Hit UU, because actually this is not keyframed, so if you just hit U, it's not gonna show you anything. So you hit UU to bring it up. And in this case, since I actually know what my layer is called, I'm not going to go through the trouble of pick whipping and all of that. I can actually just type in left eye track. It will figure out what's going on. Derp. If it's giving you guff, you can always highlight that and just go back down. Left eye track, position, boom. So there we go. So there's my eyeballs, and they are moving along with everything else. And let's go back to our master shot here. And the easiest thing to do in this case, since I already know that my rebob is positioned where he needs to be, because he's not, even with the outside of the frame, and I also know that he's linked up already with the null and is tracked more or less correctly, then I can just duplicate this layer and then take the rebob eyes, and I'm going to replace, by holding down Alt, you can replace that footage with a different layer. So now I have just the eyeballs on top, and everything else went away because my blending mode is set wrong. I'm actually going to change this back to add. And why does it look like that? I can tell you why. It's because... Why is it? Because it's not oh, I know exactly why it is. When I duplicated that layer, I also duplicated all of the effects that were on the layer. And I don't want any of them. So let's just delete those. And now here we go. So now we have our eyeballs, and that's actually a bit brighter than I was thinking it was going to be. I could either turn it down in the optical flares, or I could turn this down right here. I think we'll do like 50. Yeah, those red eyes, as funny as I think it is that all the monsters we do have red eyes, it really does help sell the shot. There's no question that there's something in that tree staring at you now. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure. I hope that you've learned something and had fun watching this video. Hope that you're pumped to go out there and start doing some compositing of your own. This is Devin Langston saying, place those things together.